The videotape of that interview shows an expression of pure venom on Lilith Aquino's face, that the Presidio children had unequivocal medical evidence proving that the sadistic sexual abuse they had undergone appeared not to matter. When the Aquinos made their trip to Britain and used it to make a public defense of their religion, they were confident that the investigative process was all but over. The FBI and San Francisco Police Department had, after all, been forced to abandon all criminal charges based on the Presidio children's evidence. Surely the Army would be forced to follow suit. But the day after they returned to America, the Army handed Michael Aquino a copy of their files. The Judge Advocate General's team had decided to use a process known as titling to deal with the case. What that means is that we title Aquino as the most likely perpetrator of a particular offense, in this case, the sexual abuse of Kelly. It is a procedural device under Army law that formally records our view that he was responsible for the crime. His name is now entered in our records as the perpetrator. We don't have to do anything about it. In fact, we aren't going to force a court-martial in this case. There are two reasons for that. The first is that it would not be good for the kids to have to go to court now and be cross-examined. The second is simply that his secondment to the regular Army is ending. We just won't renew his contract, so in effect, we are getting rid of him that way. Of course, it's open to Aquino to go to court and make us go through a full legal process. In some ways, I hope he does, because if so, he'll have to pay the legal costs, and we are confident of winning. Our investigation showed that he definitely did abuse Kelly. On the others, we haven't reached a verdict because we don't need to. If he wants to lift that formal recording, then he'll have to sue. I look forward to seeing him in court." Close quote. One reason for the Army's confidence was a small but significant fact unknown to Aquino. When she had taken investigators to the house on Leavenworth, Kelly had told them something few people knew. A block or so away from his house was a lock-up garage where Aquino sometimes used to park his car. Kelly told the detectives about the garage and took them to it. It was the first time they had heard of it, but subsequent investigation proved it to be correct. How, unless she had been there, as she claimed, could this 3-year-old girl from the other side of town had known? In December 1990, Michael Aquino gave notice of his intention to apply to the courts for the lifting of his titling. Until the resolution of the case, and it could take years, the verdict against him in the Temple of Set must remain one of not proven. The Process Church of the Final Judgment. No such caveat applies to the last major international order of religious Satanists. By its own boast, violent crime is a prerequisite of its belief system. In the same issue of The Lamp of Thoth, which carried Michael Aquino's call to satanic arms, the following article was reproduced. Quote, "The process, what does it mean? The process is the true penultimate world movement, the ultimate fusion of all religious, political, and magical beliefs complete the process in which the dichotomy of good and evil dies. In this way, we live out the final judgment when the lamb and the goat become one. In the individual, the penultimate is achieved. When the world is embraced by the process, we achieve the ultimate." Penultimate means the second to last. The process begins in individual change when we begin to play the fearful game of self. This witnesses the process in action and is not merely an intellectualized catharsis. Each individual must be helped towards realizing what course of action must be taken to initiate the process of inner change through outer expression. Our advice in this matter is clear. Any action that has seemed repulsive, reprehensible, and vile to the individual should be acted out and set free. This is not the intellectualized merit of seeing both sides, nor is it the gray area in which most occult teaching is grounded. Immediate action is the only design that fits the pattern. The criteria is very simple. We live in fear of what we despise because we fear and despise what we cannot be. If you are a Christian, this is symbolized by Satan. If a Satanist, it is symbolized by Christ. These are great fears made up by many little fears. Therefore, to unite the great fears, we must begin the process and identify, become in actuality, our little fears. The whole of existence must be based upon the transformation of little fears into conscious actions. By seeking out fear in living experience, we become fear itself. We cancel out fear for ourselves and create the penultimate stage of the process. The ultimate aim is out of our hands at the moment, resting in the guise of the gods, Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan. The symbol of the process is a triadic expression of final judgment, the reconciliation of love and fear. The process, release the fiend that lies dormant within you, for he is strong and ruthless, and his power is far beyond the bounds of human frailty. Learn to love fear. Love is to learn fear, the reconciliation of the lamb and the goat in the final judgment. As it is, so be it. Close quote. It would be tempting to dismiss this psychobabble of the processes statement as irrelevant and pompous philosophical posturing. Tempting, certainly, but dangerous also. The process church of the final judgment is the one avowedly criminal international satanic church that admits putting what it preaches into grotesque and blood-bathed practice. Robert Sylvester de Grimston Moore was born in Shanghai on 10 August 1935. He was educated, however, at one of England's most famous and exclusive public schools, Winchester, before moving on to a higher education course in architecture at the Regent Street Polytechnic in London. By 1962, he was also a senior member and ranking officer of L. Ron Hubbard's Church of Scientology. Perhaps significantly, Hubbard was, in the 1940s, a senior member of the OTO in America and claimed to have studied extensively and in person with Aleister Crowley. Moore claimed to have been taught personally by Hubbard. It was at the church's London headquarters in Fitzroy Street that he met Marianne McLean, a Glaswegian 4 years older than him, who had a background that included a spell in reform school and a subsequent, if short-lived, engagement to boxer Sugar Ray Robinson. When she and Moore met, McLean was working as a nightclub hostess on the fringes of the Christine Keeler Circle. One boyfriend was Dr. Stephen Ward, whose interest in the occult was deep and long-lasting. That same year, McLean and Moore set up an informal society of like-minded young people to practice a type of group counseling known as compulsion therapy. The idea was to examine the motives for and reasons behind a wide variety of compulsive behavior. It quickly became clear that the mental exercises involved were at odds with the demands of Scientology. In 1963, they left Hubbard's church and began turning the therapy group into their own fledgling religious organization. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was the result. It adopted a dualistic theology reminiscent of Cathar Gnosticism, even to the point of worshiping two apparently rival deities, God and Lucifer. Reincarnation was added to the parcel of beliefs adopted by the group, but it was a particularly warped and twisted view of the traditional concept. Above all else, the process believed in free choice. Each individual member of the human race, the church preached, was responsible for choosing his or her own fate. McLean argued, for example, that the Jews in Germany chose to go into the gas chambers during the Holocaust, and so it was with reincarnation. Anyone with a birth defect, according to Moore and McLean, had it in a previous existence and chose to retain it in their new persona. In the London of early and mid 60s, the process's concept of total freedom of choice and the license with which accompanied it was an attractive and heady philosophy. Young beatniks, bikers, and dropouts, the idle rich who would later be known as the beautiful people, the disturbed and the deranged all flocked to More's new religion. Moore and MacLean were not, however, selfless gurus embarked only upon enlightening a new generation. Both had an eye for the main chance and, in particular, money. They sought out wealthy recruits, both to supply funds and introduce the cult to a higher level of society. The plan worked. In March 1966, the process leased a large and luxurious mansion in Balfour Place, Mayfair. When they moved in, the Moores were joined by 25 cult members. Each purchased, almost as an act of allegiance to the church, an Alsatian dog. It was a trademark that would, in years to come, prove significant. 3 months later, the process went on an extended vacation. At least 18 members spent 6 weeks doing very little in Nassau before leaving the Bahamas for Mexico. Moore had leased a sizable piece of land at Xtul, Xtul, a beach area on the Yucatan Peninsula. The Xtul experience was to be formative for the nascent church. A third deity was added to their pantheon, Satan, and for the first time the followers performed together traditional satanic rituals in the Mexican moonlight. Moore and his followers returned to England with a new sense of purpose. In order to spread the word, he decided to open the house to the public and to found a magazine to propound its theology. Both were a limited success, bringing in a steady stream of new followers, often from the fashionable and ascendant world of London's pop glitterati. A bookstore was set up and overtures made to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The Process magazine went into sporadic, if reliable, circulation. For the cover of one issue, Marianne Faithfull was photographed naked and apparently dead, clutching a rose. Nor did Moore rely only on the magazine to preach his theology. In 1967, he published the first of 3 books, As It Is. In it, amid the abstracted psychedelic language of the me generation, Moore spelt out a relatively clear philosophical line. Quote, Christ said, love thine enemy. Christ's enemy was Satan, and Satan's enemy was Christ. Through love, enmity is destroyed. Through love, saint and sinner destroy the enmity between them. Through love, Christ and Satan have destroyed their enmity and come together for the end. Christ to judge, Satan to execute the judgment. Close quote. At first sight, this might appear to be merely the chemically induced ramblings of the flower power era. If one looks closer, though, and follows the process's subsequent theological statements, Moore's message appears distinctly less peaceful. Moore believed quite simply that the day of judgment was near at hand and that Christ and Satan were working together to bring it about. It was, of course, the sacred duty of everyone to whom this truth had been revealed to do all in their power to help. By the summer of 1967, Moore had figured out a way of doing so. He expounded it in his second book, Jehovah on War. Quote, my prophecy on this wasted earth and upon the corrupt creation that squats upon its surface is, thou shalt kill. Close quote. Moore had arrived at the conclusion that the best way to bring about the end of the world was to embark upon an endless spree of killing. The basis of this was his reading of the Book of Revelations, and with its predictions of Armageddon as a gratuitously violent event, Moore took it to mean that Satan was to be employed as Christ's paid executioner. Since all around him were signs of death, chaos, destruction, and the disintegration of society, a little push in the shape of ritual murder, and the day of judgment would be at hand. What made this new satanic theology radically different, aside from its inherent lunacy, was the concept that its adherents should live their lives as one long ritual. Of course, the process practiced the usual sex-based ceremonies of almost every cult since Crowley, but Moore's contribution was to propose a life of constant bloodletting as a coherent ritual in itself. The process determined to wake the world to its possibilities. Between July and August 1967, the cult decamped to San Francisco, setting up a new base in the center of the city's counterculture at 407 Cole Street in the Haight-Ashbury district. 2 blocks away at 636 Cole lived a drifter and jailbird. His name was Charles Miles Manson. By the time it arrived in America, the Process Church of the Final Judgment was split into 3 subgroups, each following or worshiping one of the cult's trinity of deities: God or Jehovah, Lucifer, or Satan. Christ was seen as the ultimate unifier whose love, come the day of judgment, would reconcile the 3 rival factions. New members were free to choose between the subgroups. To assist their selection, the deities were described in simple terms. The Jehovah's were severe, straight-laced, and Puritan. Followers of Lucifer were strong on the pleasures of the flesh, sex, drugs, and, by now inevitably, rock and roll. The Satanists were in some ways the mirror image of the Jehovah faction. They too were purists, except that their canon was one of violence, blood, and sacrifice. In a 1968 edition of the Process magazine, a follower from each section put forward a form of manifesto. To Moore, now renamed within the cult as Robert de Grimston, it mattered little which path a novice chose. All would lead ultimately to the day of judgment, which would see the final demise of all non-believers, the gray forces, as he dubbed them in his introduction. Quote, "The first path is that of the purist, who knows instinctively that sex is a degradation and a humiliation both of himself and of his partner. He knows that the sexual act is a defilement of his purity and a contradiction of his duty. Then there is the path of the idealists, Luciferians, of those who feel that their fulfillment is to be found in partnership with another human being, whose ideas are spiritual and who try to use sex as a physical vehicle and expression of their deepest love and highest aspirations of communion. The third path, Satanism, is for those who feel that in the physical act of sex and in the practice of every carnal pleasure, there lies the only true expression of their personality. 3 paths and a quagmire. Who is strong enough to follow one of the paths? Who is fool enough to fall into the quagmire? The gray forces hold sway, but the gods are returned to recruit their armies for the end. The pendulum swings. 3 paths and a quagmire. On the following pages, an advocate puts the case for each. Jehovah's advocate, Christopher Fripp. Sex is death. It is the incumbent of the devil. It is the focal point of man's rejection, the effort to propagate his species in the denial of God. It is the attempt to couple with another human in the exclusion of God. It is the defilement of purity. It is the great tempter, the big denier, the alluring road to happiness that leads down to the vortex of sick satiation and the gluttony of a spirit insensible to light. Sex for self and sex for another human. All of it is death. And now, as the world goes to its final doom, Jehovah decrees, expiate or die. Lucifer's advocate, Isabel Rennie. Attend Lord Lucifer, serve him with unfailing loyalty, and your path to Eden is assured. Give Lucifer your mind, your body, and your soul, and he will make your dream reality. Follow him and find truth in the fusion of yourself with another. Follow him and stand proud beside your counterpart, whom he shall give you. Let him wash away all pointless guilt, all worthless fear, all futile shame, rid you of all embarrassment and the crippling bonds of self-restraint. Satan's advocate, Mendez Castle. Come then to a room all draped in black. Coffins line the walls. On marble slabs, like bodies in a morgue, lie several naked women, alive yet painted to seem dead. You feel the atmosphere of death as you stroke the woman and then lie upon her. Or would you rather death itself? Come, then, a cemetery. Still night, but this time no one but you and a woman of your choice. You walk between the gravestones, performing upon them acts of desecration, whilst each other watches in delight. Or is your place within a ruined church high on a hill? No glass in the tall slotted windows, but perfect for the celebration of the Black Mass. The priest in midnight garb, the congregation, men and women unclothed, except for the blood-red masks upon their faces, stand silent, waiting for the presence of their Lord and Master, Satan. A naked girl, fair-haired, and in the very prime of youth, lies like a human sacrifice upon the altar. Take your choice, indulge, explore the limits. Leave nothing out and use every means of sharpening the senses. Alcohol to set the blood coursing in your veins, narcotics to heighten your feelings to a peak of sensitivity, so that the very lowest depths of physical sensation can be plumbed and wallowed in. The furthest researches of the body's strange delights must not be passed over. Sink down in the decadence of excessive self-indulgence. Let no so-called sin, perversion, or depravity escape your searching senses. Partake of all of them to overflowing. What else is there? What other satisfaction? For always death must come and end the sensual game and take away the dark forbidden pleasures of the flesh that are the mark of life and the only true means of living. But let him not come before you have lived your life to the full, seen everything, done everything, and felt everything the body is capable of feeling. There is nothing else now, with the end of man so near. There is no dialectic but death. Close quote. Those excerpts were printed in The Process magazine, number 4, first published in March 1968. That same month, de Grimston sent out 30 members from the San Francisco base to preach the gospel in Los Angeles. From a rented house in South Cochran Street, the Process members descended on the shabby pavements of Sunset Strip to pick up new recruits from amongst the streams of addicts, dropouts, and Hell's Angels that roamed up and down. Simultaneously, the city's new glitterati were sought out for favor and patronage. In a city now familiar with the flotsam of the 60s generation, the Process members stood out. Most wore black, black suits, sweaters, robes, capes. The only contrasts were occasional silver pendant in the shape of a cross, inverted or upright depending on which deity was being worshipped, and the satanic goat of Mendes, picked out in red stitching on the reverse of their capes. The official Process symbol was a version of the swastika. Issue number 4 of the Process magazine, the so-called sex edition, which they hawked around LA and San Francisco, was similarly eye-catching. The front cover was filled by a photograph of a satanic ceremony. Beneath a large and inverted cross, hooded celebrants surrounded a naked girl spread eagle on an altar. The back page boasted a painting that depicted a winged skeleton flying over a pile of naked and apparently dead human bodies. It set the tone for what was to follow. The next issue of the Process magazine was entitled Fear. In an article headed Satan is Fear, de Grimston wrote, quote, fear is beneficial. Fear is the catalyst of action. It is the energizer, the weapon built into the game in the beginning, enabling a being to create an effect upon himself, to spur himself on to new heights, and to brush aside the bitterness of failure. Do we know that the world is governed by the sum total of every human being's fear, and ours is not excluded? And do we know that wars and rumors of wars mount up in an ascending spiral of violence and potential violence as the fear in the hearts of men intensifies? And do we know that only one thing ensures the escalation of the spiral of violence and destruction? Our own unwillingness to recognize the full extent of our fear and its effects. Our fear of fear. Close quote. The solution to this paranoid fantasy was, in de Grimston's mind at least, for people to confront their fears by doing whatever it was they were afraid of. Quote, by seeking out fear in living experience, we become fear itself. Close quote. De Grimston's increasingly violent theology attracted a large number of converts. The process church, for all its iconoclastic anarchism, was divided into 6 hierarchical levels: acolyte, initiate, messenger, prophet, priest, and master. Together they formed what de Grimston chose to call the family. And when, upon attaining the rank of messenger, the follower was given a temple name, these two were deliberately based on the family unit. There would be brothers, sisters, and fathers, though curiously, never any mothers. All members, as they progressed through the process ranks, and whichever deity they chose to follow, were required to dedicate themselves to a lengthy periodic of satanic worship. Some reports from inside the cult suggest that these were based on the traditional satanic staples of sex, blood, and sacrifice. Among those who were quickly attracted to the process and its mind-warping theology was the drifter from down the block in San Francisco, Charles Manson. Born on 12 November 1934 in Kentucky, Charles Mills Manson was the illegitimate product of a union between a nomadic and petty criminal mother and a self-styled drugstore cowboy father. By the time he reached adolescence, Manson had been carted around half the prairie states, abandoned several times by his feckless parents, and finally dumped in the Gibault Home for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was not a promising childhood. Angry, bitter, and rejected, Manson switched from care homes to reformatories at the age of 16 after a conviction for petty theft. Between 1950 and 1967, he spent virtually every year in state penitentiaries for stealing cars. His only education was self-administered. In Terminal Island, San Pedro, he devotedly learned how to pimp so that he would have a career to fall back on when the auto theft trade was slack. Pimping swiftly earned him another jail term, 10 years for transporting prostitutes across a state line in a stolen car, naturally, and for attempting to cash a bogus check. He spent the time at McNeil Island and Terminal Island penitentiaries, emerging into the Californian sunshine on 21 March 1967. 3 months later, the Process Church arrived in town, just yards away from Manson's Cole Street house. He had already enthusiastically embraced the ambiance of San Francisco during that summer of love. Quote, pretty little girls were running around every place with no panties or bras and asking for love. Grass and hallucinatory drugs were being handed to you on the streets. It was a different world than I had ever been in, and one that I believed was too good to be true. I didn't run from it. I joined it and the generation that lived in it. Close quote. Part of that generation was the process. By summer 1967, Manson was beginning to formulate a wild and drug-addled philosophy based on hatred, revenge, and sex. He and de Grimston were naturally drawn together. The result was the evolution of Manson's philosophy into archetypal process theology. While de Grimston wrote of the importance of confronting and living out fear, Manson lectured his nascent family, in itself modeled on the process, on the concept of getting the fear. So close did the embryonic mass killer become to the imported cult that he was invited to contribute an article for its forthcoming issue. The theme was to be called Death. Quote, "Death is peace from this world's madness and paradise in my own self. Death as I lay in my grave of constant vibration, endless now. My love, I love myself as I love my death. The words I send you bore me and bring me from my death only to play in your illusion and bring down the Christian thought, placing new value on life, being death and death being life. Now is and will be as it always has been, indescribable. In your heart is a part of my life's heart in death. Die." Close quote. Within all this is clearly discernible the influence of de Grimston's process teaching. Throughout the autumn of 1967 until 1968, Manson, together with his family, was inseparable from the process church. When it decamped to Los Angeles, so did the Manson family. When it courted pop stars like John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, so did Manson. When it preached violent sacrifice based on the Book of Revelation and aimed at ushering in the Day of Judgment, so did Manson. The evidence was clear to Vincent Bugliosi, the deputy district attorney ultimately assigned to prosecute Charles Manson for the multiple murders in Hollywood during July and August of 1969. Quote, "Manson's link with the process is fascinating. There is fairly persuasive evidence that he borrowed some of their teachings. I'm inclined to think that his contact with the group probably occurred in San Francisco in 1967, at the time when his philosophy was still being formulated, in view of the many parallels between Manson's teachings and those of the process as revealed in their literature. Both preached an imminent, violent Armageddon in which all but the chosen few would be destroyed. Both found the basis for this in the Book of Revelation. Both conceived that the motorcycle gangs, such as Hell's Angels, would be the troops of the last days, and both actively sought to solicit them to their side. The three great gods of the universe, according to the process, were Jehovah, Lucifer, and Satan, with Christ as the ultimate unifier who reconciles all three. Manson had a simpler duality. He was known to his followers as both Satan and Christ. These are only some of the parallels I found. They are enough to convince me, at least, that even if Manson himself may never have been a member of the process, he borrowed heavily from the Satanic cult. Close quote. Bugliosi was only slightly wide of the mark. The process would ultimately admit that Manson was one of its own and would claim his killings as part of its theology. By the end of 1968, Manson was established within the family as the leader of a satanic order. The bus he had bought in San Francisco in October 1967 was now painted black and decked out inside as a temple. One leading family member, Bobby Busoliel, painted the familiar goat of Mendes, Baphomet image inside. Manson himself had made it known that he was the living image of an arcane Gnostic deity, Abraxas, a rooster-headed god figure with serpent feet in whom light and darkness, good and evil, were supposed to be both unified and transcended. The same period seems to have witnessed a splintering and dispersal of the original process immigrants from London. Most were admitted to the United States on 90-day visitor visas and had long outstayed their welcome. Some returned to England, whilst others went on the run. Branches of the church were established in New Orleans, Dallas, Toronto, Chicago, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. De Grimston and McLean decamped for New York to set up a process church on Cornelia Street in the fashionable Greenwich Village district. Before he left California, however, de Grimston released his third book of theology, Satan on War. It contained the apocalyptic instruction which was repeated in The Lamp of Thoth 20 years later. Quote, "Release the fiend that lies dormant within you, for he is strong and ruthless, and his power is far beyond the bounds of human frailty." Close quote. The disappearance of the Process Church from California was accompanied by a curious rise in the number of dead dogs discovered in the Santa Cruz area, just south of San Francisco. Most were German Shepherds, Alsatians, and had been decapitated, mutilated, or skinned expertly. A disturbing number had been completely drained of their blood. Santa Cruz police were at a loss to explain the incidents until a man called Stanley Baker was arrested and charged with a murder from out of the state. According to California law enforcement records, Baker had a 2-sentence response to his caution upon arrest. Quote, "I have a problem. I am a cannibal." Close quote. A subsequent body search revealed a multitude of occult designs, including a swastika tattooed on Baker's torso and a small leather pouch. Inside was a human finger bone. Baker calmly told the somewhat disturbed detectives that the finger bone belonged to his recent victim, whom he admitted killing. Worse, he had cut out the man's heart and eaten it in a satanic ritual. He claimed to have been recruited in Wyoming into a splinter group formed from the remnants of the Californian process. He had taken part in rituals based on blood, frequently provided by the sacrifice of dogs, and had come to California to receive new religious instruction from its leader. The group called itself the 4P movement, or 4Pi for short. Its leader was known as the Grand Shingon, who Baker alleged was a prominent and wealthy doctor or business executive living in Los Angeles. The description doesn't fit either de Grimston, by now in New York City anyway, or Charles Manson, though strangely, family members referred to Manson repeatedly as the Grand Shingon. Manson, in any event, had yet to embark on the killing spree in Hollywood's luxury mansions, but the similarities between the two groups are too great to be easily discounted. Baker provided other useful insights. The Shingon Process offshoot group had split in two during the early part of 1969, with a breakaway faction claiming that there was too much emphasis on blood and sacrifice and too little on good old-fashioned satanic sex. The sacrificial specialists, headed by Grand Shingon in LA, were apparently concerned about mobility. Baker told the Santa Cruz detectives that the group processed a portable carved wooden altar, a specially designed sacrificial knife with 6 blades, and a movable crematorium to dispose of its victims' bodily remains. He also led them to another member, a biker who independently confirmed the initial testimony, but was unable to provide any identities of the leaders. The Baker evidence tends to suggest that when the process dispersed from California, its already violent teachings were spread across the states and, in some cases, modified slightly. This would certainly fit with the activities of Manson and the family. Cielo Drive is a narrow and secluded street in the multimillionaire residential belt of Beverly Hills, just north of the squalid urban sprawl of Los Angeles. In the expansive and extremely private houses of this part of Hollywood live the rich and famous of the film and music worlds. Late on Friday, 8 August 1969, a battered yellow and white Ford saloon cruised slowly up to number 10050. Inside the house were Sharon Tate, a 26-year-old blonde actress, Jay Sebring, Hollywood hairstylist and drug dealer, Wojciech Frykowski, a 32-year-old playboy, Abigail Ann Folger, 25-year-old and heir to the Folger coffee retailing fortune, and Stephen Earl Parent, an 18-year-old high school graduate. Parent was the first to die, shot as he drove away. Wojciech Frykowski awoke to find a .22 caliber bunt line special pointing at his head. The man holding it said, quote, "I am the devil. I am here to do the devil's business," close quote. The man was Charles Tex Watson. In the ensuing minutes, he, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Sadie Mae Glutz were involved in an orgy of apparently motiveless killing. All the occupants of 10050 Cielo Drive died either by hanging, stabbing, or gunshot wounds, all delivered with seeming detachment by the intruders. Sharon Tate was 8 months pregnant. Sadie Mae Glutz and Patricia Krenwell held her down while Watson stabbed her to death through the stomach. Glutz dipped a towel in the blood and scrawled the word pig on a wall in the front hall. The family had killed. Its orders had come from Charles Manson. The killings at 10050 Cielo Drive were neither the first nor the last that Manson's family would accomplish that year. 10 days earlier, Manson, Glutz, Mary Brunner, and Bobby Busoliel had slaughtered a 34-year-old music teacher and drug supplier called Gary Hinman at his house on Old Topanga Canyon Road, Los Angeles. Although ostensibly a drug-related dispute that led to murder, the family left its trademark. One of them scrawled "political piggy" and drew a crude version of the clenched fist symbol of the militant Black Power group, the Black Panthers. The messages were inscribed in Hinman's blood. 24 hours after the killing of Sharon Tate and her house guests, the family struck again. At around midnight, the yellow and white Ford pulled up outside 3301 Waverly Drive in the Los Feliz district. In the car were Manson, Glutz, Watson, Krenwinkel, and two other family members, Leslie Van Houten and Clem Grogan. The family walked up the drive and forced their way into the house. Lino LaBianca, a supermarket magnate and millionaire, and his wife Rosemary were asleep. They were woken, half garroted, and ultimately stabbed to death. Watson carved the word war on Lino's abdomen. One of the others dipped a finger in Rosemary's blood and scrawled "Death to Pigs" on the wall. The same blood was used to inscribe "Rise" over a living room painting and "Helter Skelter" on the fridge. The Manson killings have been too well covered to need retelling in any great detail, but Bugliosi's analysis shows that the murders were in some way a ritual for the family, a rite which owed its inspiration, at least, to the process. Manson had apparently intended to create a race war which would help usher in the final judgment, as predicted in process theology. To this end, he attempted to implicate the Black Panthers in the belief that there would be a violent backlash from the white neo-Nazi movement, leading to bloody confrontation. This matched the transcript of an interrogation conducted by LAPD of a former process member connected with two motorcycle murders, neither of which involved either Manson or the church. Quote, "Suspect, the process, don't like anybody that they can't indoctrinate or anybody that is not with them. They are just totally against what they call gray forces, the rich establishment or the Negroes." Detective, "Why don't they like Negroes?" Suspect, "I don't know, they just don't." Detective, "They have a natural hate for the Negro?" Suspect, "They have a natural hate, but they would also like to use the Negro as a whole to begin some kind of militant thing. They are really good at picking out angry people." Close quote. Picking out and creating an almost unshakable psychological bond with recruits was also a process speciality. That, among all the other curious coincidences, led Bugliosi to the conclusion that Manson led not simply a deranged and murderous hippie gang, but a dedicated group of religious Satanists, an offshoot of the official Process Church dedicated to carrying out its theology of violence. The district attorney put his suspicion to Manson during hours of questioning. Mostly, Manson skirted around the question of his links with the process, but when asked if he knew a Robert de Grimston or a Robert Moore, Manson replied, quote, "You're looking at him. Moore and I are one and the same," close quote. Bugliosi took this to mean that the two men were ideologically, if not physically, united. The Process Church, however, was at that stage less keen to implicate itself in Manson's activities. Two members, brothers John and Matthew, visited Bugliosi unannounced. They claimed to have been sent from the church's national headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and, after leaving a stack of Process literature, officially denied that Manson had ever been involved with the group, much less met Moore. Curiously, the next day their names were recorded on Manson's prison list of visitors. After Manson's trial in 1971, interestingly, during the trial, he and his family carved a version of the Process's swastika emblem on their foreheads. The Process Church dropped largely from sight. Magazines were either no longer printed or else kept completely within the organization. What clues American intelligence officials were able to pick up indicated that the church had split into numerous smaller groups, which then operated as independent cults, each with its own variation on process theology. British law enforcement officers paid no attention whatever to the rump left behind in London. But if no longer preaching and publishing, process members were far from inactive. Arliss Perry died at midnight on 12 October 1974. She was 19 years old and had been a student at Stanford University in Santa Clara County, California, for only a few weeks. She was found in the university chapel, naked from the waist down, her blue jeans carefully arranged upside down over her thighs, lying beneath a large carved cross. A 30-inch candle had been rammed into her vagina, another propped between her breasts. She had been choked, beaten, and stabbed with an ice pick behind the ear. None of this information was made public until 1988. 11 years earlier, on 24 October 1979, a convicted murderer incarcerated in Attica Correctional Facility tore a chapter out of a book, wrote a note in the margin, and mailed it secretly to a detective he trusted. The book was a standard work on witchcraft and Satanism. The chapter concerned the occult connections of Charles Manson. The note read, quote, "Arliss Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain. Followed to California. Stanford University," close quote. The killer who wrote that chilling inscription was Richard David Berkowitz. To most American citizens, he was a mass murderer better known by his press pseudonyms, the 44 caliber killer or the Son of Sam. Berkowitz was born on 1 June 1953 and placed for adoption almost immediately by his Jewish mother. A solitary, shy boy set apart by the knowledge that he was adopted, Berkowitz grew up in the Co-op City area of the Bronx. During Army service in... Sorry, this book has a tear in it and I don't have the word. During Army service he renounced Judaism and turned to Christianity for registering as a Baptist. The conversion did not last long. Something 1974, his adopted father, Nat, realized that David was in deep psychological difficulties. Always aloof, he had become convicted that he could hear demon voices in his head. It was at this vulnerable point in his life that Berkowitz was introduced to Satanism. In a letter to a Californian Christian minister written on 15 October 1979, more than 2 years after he was jailed for life, Berkowitz explained, quote, "I really don't know how to begin this letter, but at one time I was a member of an occult group. Being sworn to secrecy or face death, I cannot reveal the name of the group, nor do I wish to. This group contained a mixture of satanic practices which included the teachings of Aleister Crowley. It was, and still is, totally blood-oriented, and I am certain you know what I mean. The Coven's doctrines are a blend of ancient Druidism, the teachings of the Secret Order of the Golden Dawn, black magic, and a host of other unlawful and obnoxious practices. These people will stop at nothing, including murder. They have no fear of man-made laws or the Ten Commandments. Close quote. By this point in his 36-year life sentence, Berkowitz had become a relatively prolific letter writer. As is common for life-term murderers, many of those who contacted him were evangelical Christians anxious to save his soul, though ignorant throughout of his involvement with Satanism. It is not uncommon for men facing lengthy sentences to succumb to such religious blandishments. Had Berkowitz done so, his uniquely detailed letters would have been open to dismissal as the zeal of the converted. As it was, they specifically rejected Christianity. Quote, "A woman who lives on the West Coast has been counseling me," close quote. He wrote to a second minister, quote, "She is a Christian. To be honest, I'm not," close quote. What the Berkowitz correspondence revealed was his involvement with an offshoot of the Californian process/Shingon group set up around the time of, and indeed involving, Charles Manson and his murderous family. Berkowitz joined a subgroup based in New York in 1975, 6 years after Manson's arrest and 12 months after Arliss Perry died in the chapel at Stanford University. In a letter dated 25 October 1979, sent to a lawyer who had previously questioned him about his involvement with Satanism, he outlined the group's nature and practices. Quote, "You asked about Satanists. I'm not talking of the thrill seekers who hang on to and join every anti-establishment group which comes along. I'm not talking about those who remain on the fringe of such groups. My letter is in reference to the elite and dedicated hardcore members of occult groups. You see, these people cannot be taken lightly. Please try to understand their philosophy of life and society. They have no fear of man-made laws nor the laws of God. To them, murder comes easy. Being anti-God, they love nothing better than a good kill. These people will stop at nothing in order to fulfill their desires. They have the complete ability to elude the police and cover their tracks completely. Many members of these hidden and secret groups are participating of their own free wills. Others aren't. Yet they are there to obey every command and complete every task without question. Lost souls, half-mad zombies they are. They hate God. I'm not talking about common criminals. They are people who will follow a chosen lamb throughout the ends of the earth. I'm serious about this. There is no reason why I shouldn't be. Satanists, genuine ones, are peculiar people. They aren't ignorant peasants or semi-illiterate natives. Rather, their ranks are filled with doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and basically highly responsible citizens. They are normal on the outside, at least. They are not a careless group who are apt to make mistakes, but they are secretive and bonded together by a common need and a desire to mete out havoc on society. It was Aleister Crowley who said, quote, "I want blasphemy, murder, rape, revolution, anything bad," close quote. Surely you will agree that death literally followed Crowley's footsteps, close quote. To back up his story, Berkowitz gave precise details of a number of deaths, details which had never been made public anywhere in the United States. Among them was that of Arliss Perry. Initially, no one was prepared to take seriously Berkowitz's increasingly urgent warnings about the bizarre satanic group to which he claimed to have belonged. To law enforcement officials, he was simply a ruthless serial killer, responsible for 6 murders and a further 6 attempts. Psychiatrists were divided in opinion as to his sanity. The only man to listen with a degree of comprehension was an investigative journalist called Maury Terry. Maury had been troubled by inconsistencies in some of the original evidence surrounding the Son of Sam killings, apparently flaws that had never emerged because Berkowitz pleaded guilty to the murders. He began piecing together the information emerging in Berkowitz's letters and a number of clues the killer had deliberately given. The ultimate result was a clear identification of the satanic group to which Berkowitz belonged, a process/Shingon breakaway calling itself the 22 Disciples of Hell, and unequivocal evidence that others had been involved in the murders. Terry's evidence forced the police to reopen the case file. This was swiftly followed by a series of curiously coincidental deaths. Those affected had invariably been identified by Berkowitz and Terry as involved with ritual satanic slaughter. One of the early corroborative aspects which persuaded Terry that Berkowitz was neither insane nor deliberately deluding him was the killer's knowledge of a large number of dog mutilations and killings. Between 1976 and 1977, the year in which Berkowitz's satanic group embarked upon its trail of murder in New York, no fewer than 85 Alsatian-type dogs had been found close to the killing area of the mass murderers. They had been surgically skinned, some had been drained of blood. The explanation Berkowitz gave made sense to Terry. The dogs were used in rituals by the group to which he belonged. Their deaths had been part of satanic ceremonies. Not only did Berkowitz have details of the incidents which had never been made public, he also told the journalist how the animals had been obtained. He had been ordered to get a job in an animal sanctuary. From there, it had been easy to obtain the dogs. The particular type of dog, Alsatians, fitted with the trademark of Robert de Grimston's original process church, though their deaths were a departure from its stately theology, which denounced any form of animal ill-treatment. Berkowitz was finally to supply the answer and confirm what Terry already knew. His group was not a direct part of the process church, but a splinter organization. The killer told Terry that it was known as a Shingon group. It was organized from coast to coast and involved several members of the original Manson family. Arliss Perry had been a member of one group but had tried to leave, hence her death. Nor did the killing cease after Berkowitz's arrest on 10 August 1977. Not only did people he, privately, identified as fellow members of the group die in very strange circumstances, but others previously unknown were murdered in what was clearly a form of ritual. The typical was the case of Howard Green and Carol Marone. Green was a 53-year-old abstract painter in Brooklyn, and Marone, 33, his girlfriend. In 1978, both developed an interest in the occult and graduated to solo satanic worship. Their small apartment in Kalb Avenue was filled with ritual paraphernalia. The couple began seeking information on Crowleyan groups in the area with a view to joining their ceremonies. At 7 p.m. on 16 December 1979, their bodies were found just off Route 80 in New Jersey. They had been bludgeoned to death. What made the killings unusual in an area where violent death was not uncommon was one key discovery. Neither body had a drop of blood in it. According to New York police, a veterinary syringe had been used to drain it. There were other subsequent killings like those of Howard Green and Carol Marone, each with clear ritual overtones. Nor did the spate of animal mutilations cease. Year after year, local police forces in states across America have reported a rising number of discoveries involving piles of dead dogs. In many cases, the animal's blood has been surgically drained. Frequently, the dogs are Alsatian type. In 1984, 15,000 such incidents were recorded in the United States. Britain has never kept a tally. At the end of 1979, Berkowitz suddenly retreated into his shell and refused to talk further about his involvement with Satanism. He had that summer been attacked by fellow inmates with a razor. The resulting wound on the side of his neck needed 56 stitches. Apart from expressing the opinion that the attack had been motivated by his process Shingon group, the so-called Son of Sam killer had one last message for Maury Terry. Quote, "There are other sons out there. God help the world," close quote. It was curiously reminiscent of the challenge that Charles Manson issued to a Los Angeles courtroom as the decade began. Quote, "What about your children? You say there are just a few in his family of killers. There are many, many more coming in the same direction. They are running in the streets and they are coming right at you," close quote. Maury Terry, who won both police acceptance and a national award for his investigation, is certain that the process is far from finished, albeit in a series of increasingly arcane permutations. Quote, "I'm convinced. The evidence is quite clear that organized satanic groups, be they genuine process, official OTO, or subgroups resulting from internal schisms, exist and carry out illegal rituals. It is beyond doubt that some of these involve murder. This isn't just an American problem. The whole thing started up again in Britain with Aleister Crowley, and he exported it to the United States. This is a multinational problem, and England isn't exempt," close quote. Within a few months, Maury Terry was to be proved right. Robert de Grimston stayed in America. He lives and is periodically the subject of police surveillance in New York, but the Process Church itself had come home to Britain at the time of the Manson trial. It lay low for nearly 2 decades. When it resurfaced in Christopher Bray's Lamp of Thoth magazine during the summer of 1988, it was as if it had never been away. The message was the same, the theology still brutal and violent, and for the first time it publicly acknowledged Manson as one of its disciples. Quote, "Manson went astray where others in the process have succeeded. He was sucked into the whirlpool of fame and fortune, and when he didn't cut it, he decided to cut it up. Despite this, Manson speaks for a generation, and he is deserving of the cult following his infamy has secured. Perhaps this is because he recognizes fear so well. Perhaps because he testifies to those areas many of us deny exist. Perhaps the fascination is that he carried out his ideas in action and showed many of us what it is like to actually commit the crime we'd like to commit. Manson was right when he said he was a scapegoat. In this way, he has a clear right to say he's Christ and also the devil. Manson's intention was to open up the occult centers of perception by a unique pop-based outlook influenced primarily by the process, in his terms, getting the fear. This was a natural talent he had in seeing prevalent social themes, in knowing the right time for action, even if this action was murder. Manson went astray where others in the process have succeeded. He got caught. A pity, really. However, as the family might have agreed, "You'll get yours yet. The process will see to that," close quote. Psychopathic garbage? Diluted gibberish? Certainly, but apparently sincere. The Process Church of the Final Judgment is living proof of the reality of satanic crime. That it still exists nearly 15 years after its disciple David Berkowitz was jailed for mass murder, and more than 2 decades after Charles Manson celebrated its apocalyptic Satanism in blood, is a testament to the lack of attention given to organized religious Satanism by law enforcement officials. A thriving process, and Christopher Bray was happy to include a contact address for potential new recruits, is a danger throughout the world, but the world is busy burying its collective head in the sand. Satanic cults. The Ordo Templi Orientis, the first Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and the Process Church of the Final Judgment are all international satanic groups categorized by law enforcement specialists as religious Satanism, yet each bears the hallmark of what those same detectives recognize as satanic cults. A cult is, quite simply, an organized and systematic religious organization that exists to a greater or lesser degree in secret and whose beliefs or actions are in some way immoral or illegal. Each of the four major modern satanic religious sects matches that definition. Why then are they not listed by the police as cults? The answer is that satanic cults, as a category, exist only to describe those cases where law enforcement officers have failed to pigeonhole the perpetrators in any other way. Put simply, this means that even where police are prepared to accept as genuine a child's disclosures of ritual abuse or murder, unsuccessful investigations are effectively dumped in a file marked satanic cult. Yet the reason for the failure of such investigations is all too frequently that law enforcement has made no effort to compare the details disclosed by the victim with a known pattern of particular religious satanic groups. To use the analogy, most organized crime or terrorist groups throughout the world have, quote, trademarks, close quote, peculiar to them, and which enable criminal intelligence teams to identify the organization likely to have been responsible for a particular offense. Most developed countries and a host of undeveloped nations devote millions of dollars each year to the maintenance of such intelligence files. The reason why individual police officers are largely unable to cross-match incidents of apparently ritual or satanic crime with the profile of known organized groups is that no such intelligence is maintained in any meaningful way. Only in a handful of individual police departments across America does such activity take place. Even the FBI, the one national police force in North America specifically charged with such intelligence gathering, fails to keep useful research data. The FBI's attitude and behavior will be examined in Chapter 6. Throughout Europe, the picture is even more dismal. Police forces in this, the traditional home of satanic crime, are not yet ready to study the belief systems of religiously motivated offenders. The result is the mysterious satanic cult. While some individual cases may throw up details which are non-traditional, most known incidents of ritual abuse and crime conform to set satanic patterns. An official law enforcement label of satanic cult should be seen as an indication of deep malaise in the police of satanic crime. That the malaise is worldwide is all the more shameful.